All right, so welcome to the Permaculture Food Forest section of the Museum of Northern Arizona's Colton Community Garden. So this is a garden that's located at 7,000 feet elevation. Also where we are, we're at a little bit of a cold sink, so the cool air comes off the mountain and we often get frost before other parts of Flagstaff too. So we can sometimes count on about a 3 to 5 degree colder temperature than other parts of Flagstaff. But we're really excited to share with you introduction to the permaculture food forest. It was just put in, the rocks and the earthworks were put in this last fall, and the seedlings were literally only planted, some days ago and some as much as 2 months ago. So they're just getting established and started. But before starting on a tour in the permaculture garden, I wanted to give a little bit of an overview for folks that may not be familiar with permaculture. So permaculture, if you break up the word, it means permanent culture. It is a way of not just growing food, but actually living in closer relationship with the earth and with the planet. So there's 3 ethics. It's earth care, people care, and fair share. And when people often ask me, what's the difference between permaculture and organic gardening? I would say organic gardening really takes into consideration the earth care, but it doesn't necessarily have an ethic around this idea that everyone, all plants, all animals, humans have the right to access to food, water, livelihood, and a good quality of life. Permaculture principles, there's so much depth we could go into. I am going to try to focus on what plants in this tour grow really well at high elevation. I've got a couple experimental ones that I've heard are going to grow well, but I honestly have no idea. So that's what's kind of exciting and fun, is we're putting things in and some are going to do great and thrive, and a handful of ones are sort of those outliers. So we're at the growing zones, between 5-6 growing zone, depending on where you are in Flagstaff, and that's pretty cold. So oftentimes we'll have plants like a cherry that may grow successfully, but then its fruits get frosted regularly. So we're trying to push that edge a little bit by creating small microclimates, so like a big pile of rocks, to help to bring that growing zone up to a little bit warmer than it might be otherwise. So in future plans, actually in this back corner, we're going to be doing a big rock wall Gabion, and grapes do really, really well in Flagstaff as long as they have a nice hot kind of thermal mass area, and that can help to extend its ability to grow in this high elevation. So yeah, I guess we could kind of look over here to the left for starters. So permaculture is not by any means new. In fact, this is while it was a term that was coined by David Holmgren, Bill Mollison in Australia, I think in, I want to say like the 90s is when it became more popularized. It has been around for thousands of years. So it's rooted in indigenous knowledge and wisdom. And then there's other layers, including appropriate technologies that underlay that. So the idea is that it's a cultivated ecology. So we are growing plants that are going to produce the majority of them are actually in a perennial system. So that means that plant is going to keep growing and growing and growing each year, getting its roots deep in the ground, and it's going to be giving you food, fiber, medicines. So it's a gift that just keeps giving. So in permaculture food forest, it takes a little bit of effort to get it established and planted, and then it keeps giving. And when we think about water use, especially in the arid Southwest, a lot of people ask questions about like, oh, I don't know, this plant may take a little more water. The vast majority of these plants, once they're established, and especially in this section of the garden, which is the lowest elevation of our entire Colton Community Garden site, I think the corner up there, we estimated that it was maybe a 5 to 8 foot drop. So this is at the lowest point, as well as you'll notice around the garden and over here, we have some willows that have become naturalized. Willows don't usually grow in Flagstaff. We don't usually have enough water for that. So what that means is that the water table is a little bit higher here. We suspected that it might just be natural water table. There's actually a spring about Coyote Springs, which is like a 5-minute walk, or we have a city water tanks that could be holding water and potentially leaking in. So we don't know, but part of our goal is to at least get our perennial trees and shrubs, get their roots nice down deep into the ground and tap, so that once they get established, they require very, very little water after that. So back to talking about food forests and indigenous knowledge. So permaculture systems are rooted in nature as teacher. So learning from the natural system, we're trying to mimic the way that ecological systems work. So a lot of times in permaculturists will say, think like a forest. What would a forest do? So specifically, if you think, okay, in a garden system, you know, who sows, who plants that seed, who fertilizes the seed, who aerates the soil. You can think about a forest. Who are the same creatures and elements that do that kind of work for you as well? So over here, we have, this is a little bit of an example minus our volunteer rhubarb that was left over and we didn't have the heart to pull out. These are actually some really important local, regional food and medicine crops and fiber crops that grow in the Southwest. So Indigenous people around the world have been managing ecosystems for thousands and thousands of years. And in fact, the degree to which ecosystems have been managed is much larger than scientists ever suspected. So they're now suspecting and looking at the Amazon. They've actually got something, I think it's called the terra preta, which is where the biochar, so the indigenous folks in the Amazon have been burning plants on a cycle that have actually built the nutrients and built the fertility in the soil and could have been responsible for actually creating the vast majority of that diversity in that area. So in our region, the ponderosa pine forest up at 7,000 feet, and then as you drop or just go the east side of Flagstaff, a little bit lower elevation, a little drier on the east side, you're going to be in the the pinyon juniper woodlands. And the pinyon juniper woodlands, a lot of these really important cool medicinal plants are growing. And many of those areas, like the Eldon area, have been tended by humans for, again, thousands of years. So through their cultivation of certain crops. So three-leaf sumac we've got hiding, actually, I think in the far back corner. You can't see it. It's tiny right now. It's just getting established. When that plant is actually pruned, it will create straighter branches and be able to be used for weaving. Or, you know, when a prickly pear is tended, it's going to produce plants and pads and fruit differently than when it's not tended. So just to point out, I'm going to climb in here carefully, point out a couple of really cool plants. So we have a prickly pear back here. We did pick up a variety just to experiment with one of the spineless varieties. So this is adapted to growing zone number 6. So this is pushing that threshold a little bit in this area. We wanted to see what was possible. Cool thing about it is that you can harvest the pads pretty easily without the spines on it. And then you also have the delicious blossoms and or the fruit that you can make prickly pear syrup and juice, and it's so yummy. We've got some little Gamble oak over there in the corner, of course, which can be made for flour. We've got some banana yuccas, some artemisia, Navajo tea, Hopi tea. So this is Thelosperma. This is a really, really delicious tea. An important medicinal in this area. We've got some globe mallow, fiber plant. We've got blue flax. Ooh, and then here's another really cool one. There's a couple of them. So there's 2 different species of wolfberry. There's one right here, and there's another one hidden. It's being overgrown. So the cool thing about wolfberries is any prehistoric archaeological sites, you'll often know that it's a site if you identify that wolfberry is there. So that's been associated for a long time with communities and habitation in different parts of the Southwest. These are edible fruits and berries. Another really cool thing about permaculture is that if you pay attention to plant families and plant genuses that grow productively and the native varieties, then you can pretty safely take the more cultivated and domesticated varieties and grow those successfully. So an example would be that this is actually Elysium, the wolfberry. So what that means, we'll show you in a second. On this other section, we have a lot more of the non-native permaculture plants that are fruit producing, medicine producing. So we have goji berry, which is also Elysium, grows really well. Right behind you, there's a natural, I think this one looks like a golden currant. And we also have a gooseberry behind it, and you're nice and close to it. So that's one of our native currants that produces delicious fruits each year. And the other section and the spirals, we go further back, we're going to find some black currants and some red currants that produce really large clusters prolifically of berries. So that's kind of a fun trick to experiment with. If there's a lot of like rose family plants, there's a good chance that other plants that you grow that are fruit producing are also going to be successful. So examples like we've got our apple, I think we have some plums, so some cool diversity. Yeah, let me see. Oh, here's a fun little tiny, I don't know if you can see it. Here's a little itty bitty fern bush, which is going to grow really well. That can make a medicinal tea. That is important. And then we have some really nice artemisias coming in here, which are also used medicinally for a variety of things, including purification. They're supposed to be good for stomach stuff. It's called wormwood. I've also heard it's good for worms, and that, yeah, some of the early colonizers would use that, as well as indigenous people would use that potentially if that were ever an issue. Okay, over here we have cliff rose growing. Cliff rose, the bark, once it gets really big, has some really nice fibrous bark that can be used as very absorbent. And then we've got some of these nice banana yuccas that are just getting established under here. So this is another thing that we kind of experimented with in this section of the garden, is that we brought in some cinders. So because we are in a cold sink here and we're not where it's a little bit warmer, like east of town, we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to create some more microclimates. So the cinders, not only is it providing a mulch to help to keep in the moisture in the soil, but it's also really hot. So this is bringing extra warmth to these plants that might get chilly otherwise. So the temperature right above these cinders is going to be a lot warmer than the other sections of the garden that don't have the cinders. We also had some fun kind of putting some rocks in for a little bit more protection. All right, so that's it for that section. We have over here, this is where we're going to be building a big gabion wall. We're going to put in some big grapevines, and we're looking forward to I think we're getting an apricot from Hopi Tetskwa Permaculture Institute. Just to make a plug also locally, the Hopi Tetskwa Permaculture Institute with Hakoba and Lillian and their team is a phenomenal organization doing really good work in permaculture and also helping to support native food traditions and growing and everything wonderful. So check them out. They have a website and do good work in the community. So over here we've got a newly planted apple in the ground. Apples do really well in general in Flagstaff. Of all our fruit trees, you're most likely to produce, if we do have some early cold snaps, are the apple and or sometimes the plum. There's also parts of town where people have successfully grown apricots. I have peaches right now. I've got about 30 peaches on my little peach tree. We did not try that here just yet, but we are going to try an apricot and see if with a big rock wall, if that could somehow break up that cold sink a little bit that hits the frost on the plants. Also having some of these more established shrubs from over the years provides a little bit of like that nurse plant protection. So it can provide a little bit of protection for the light frost around the plants that are tucked around it. So let's see, I'll try to show you some examples that aren't so hidden. This is a red osier dogwood. It's a lovely plant. It was just here from before and growing well. Okay, so then over in this section in the spiral, so my permaculture students last fall, we came out here and in one day we had all the materials ready. And with a crew, I think there were 14 students out here. We moved all the rocks, we moved all the soil, and we moved the manure. And high quantities of manure to start kind of giving that soil a good cook and getting the microorganisms in there. So that's one of the most important things, and something that I did wrong for years in Flagstaff is I just didn't understand how important it was to really pay attention to the soil. So thinking about the soil, we want to have worms, we want to have those beneficial bacteria, the mycorrhizae in it. When you reach into that soil and you dig, and this is actually in pretty good shape considering we just put this in fall. It's actually nice and aerated and loose. There's a little worm in there. It smells really good. And typically our native soil is really high clay, which as far as it goes in terms of soil, high clay is not bad. High clay has tons of nutrients. So it's much better than being in Florida and having high sand. And you add and add and add all the organic matter you can, and it's hard to get that established. For us with the high clay soil, all we have to do is add more organic matter. And then once that's really well established, I have spoken to some growers that have added a tiny bit, like maybe 10% of sand, to help it be a little bit even less compacted. So another thing that we're doing, so building soil is top priority. So the native plants are pretty adapted to that high clay. We didn't put a lot of effort in. We gave them some good manure to get established. But these guys, a bunch of the varieties really need to have more amended and nutrient-rich soil. So another thing we're doing is, you'll notice on the ground, we have some cover crops that we already put in. This is a pollinator mix of clovers. So it's some of the clovers. I think we've got some red blossom ones coming in that the pollinators are particularly attracted to. So that's a nitrogen fixer. So as it's growing, it's not only covering the ground, it's not only adding nitrogen, but it's also going to be feeding the pollinators as they come through. So let's see, and then I want to talk about that as well. So an important thing about a permaculture plant is, generally if you put a plant in a permaculture garden, and it's not like you have to follow the rules all the time, but you want to ask yourself the question, what functions does this plant serve? And you want to make sure that it's serving more than one function. Oftentimes permaculturists will say 3 functions or more. So for example, the fact that the clover is, it's serving the function of being a ground cover, so it's covering so the ground's not exposed, it's adding nitrogen in the soil, and I happen to find a variety that's great for pollinators, then that's like check, check, check. One of the top permaculture plants, it's right over here, and you'll see a bunch more of it. I could actually even just pick a piece so you can see it a little bit better. So this is Comfrey. This is like the superstar permaculture plant. It grows great in Flagstaff, also with minimal water. The leaves, I make salves every single year, medicinal salves. They're incredible. It's also called bone knit. And so you can seep this oil and turn it into a salve and put it on a spray, and you could put it on a break once it's been set because it works really effectively and it helps to knit that bone and it heals it. It's a very important plant for pollinators, and this is also what's called, in permaculture we call them chop and drops. So these are plants that grow the organic matter really, really quickly, and so you can chop them and then lay them down. So with fruit trees, we got to move some comfrey under that apple tree, and then a couple plants, it's going to grow, and we're going to chop it down several times over the season, probably 4 or 5 times, and then it's going to rot in place really nicely and help to build the nutrients in the soil. The other cool thing about comfrey is this and nettles make a really nice compost tea, which I imagine that Fritz might have already spoken about sooner. With building soil health. And so you can actually put this in a 5-gallon bucket with a little bubbler and let it get nice and slimy and gross. And then all the probiotics are going to grow. And that's something that you can use to inoculate your soils. You can use that, turn it into a spray to help to fend off pests. So an incredibly useful plant. So multiple functions. This is your gem. Test that under the apple tree. Okay, and then, so this general area right here, we wanted to make sure to preserve the view of the peaks. As if you haven't seen that yet, it's jaw-dropping gorgeous here, and what I think makes this garden, the Colton Community Garden and the museum, so special is being able to have such an incredible view of the peaks, the sacred peaks. So from here, most of the plants in front of it, we've planted low-lying herbaceous plants that are not going to block that view over time. So we've got great ones like lavenders over there, more of the flax. We have some mints. I know we planted chamomile that's coming up soon. And then we started doing a couple more of the shrubs. So over here, this is an experiment. I have heard and I have read, but I have not grown in my own garden, so I can't attest to it growing incredibly yet. We're experimenting. We've got some honeyberry right here, which is similar to a blueberry, but it doesn't require the acidic soil, which Flagstaff cannot support blueberries successfully without adding very specific nutrients to make the soil more acidic. And then over here, we've got what's called a jostaberry. And the cool thing about jostaberries is it's a cross between a gooseberry and a currant. And so it's supposed to have a really yummy, flavorful berry. And then where was the last one? I think it's actually around the corner. Plants that I've grown for several years now that grow really successfully in Flagstaff are called Nanking cherries. So there's an example of one right here, and then we've got several more mixed in over there. So Nanking cherries, they're like a tart cherry. They have a pit. and they grow in big, huge hedges. So a common question that I've actually heard several people have these growing in the yards because they grow so prolifically and the birds love them, but they don't realize that they're an unbelievable edible plant and they do have a large pit. So I learned recently that you have to bring them, you can cook them after you harvest the berries. You bring them up to a low simmer with a little bit of water, and then you mash them, and then you actually strain them like you would like a blackberry if you're making some kind of jam, and then you can make delicious preserves or juices out of that, whatever you want to do with the berry. Okay, so the other thing I want to show you is over here is another lovely cover crop. This is buckwheat. This is our farm manager, Fritz's, one of her favorite cover crops. What's cool about it is that not only is it adding really good nutrients to the soil, but it's got these beautiful blossoms that are, you can just see, they're like covered in pollinators right now, and they're helping to build that soil over time. And you can also, if you want to harvest the buckwheat, that's an option that's available to you as well. So the buckwheat is doing so well. We didn't want to leave any bare exposed soil. So we have put in, with our first year, we put in some of the shrubs. So we've got tucked under here, it's kind of hard to see because it's a little bit shaded. We have a red currant. And then if you can see right in here, this is probably the plant out of all of them that I'm most excited about. I went to a permaculture class at the Central Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute, Crimpy in Basalt, Colorado this last summer. And they had mulberries growing at 8,000 feet and producing fruit. And I was so excited. So I believe we have a dwarf one that's around the corner. And I actually think this one is the Russian mulberry. And the Russian mulberry is incredibly cold hardy. So this is a little bit of an experiment to see what we could do. Mulberry trees go nice and big. So one thing I forgot to mention is that in a food forest, one of the things that you're trying to do is you're mimicking the natural forest. So that means you're mimicking the canopy plants, you're mimicking the understory, you're mimicking the shrubs and the herbaceous and the creepy crawly vines that go up things, and even the ground cover. So when we think about a plant like the mulberry plant, because this is a really small space and mini food forest, we are putting varieties a little bit closer than you might otherwise if you had more space. So we will plan on pruning some of them, but we're planning on the mulberry actually being more like one of our overstory-ish plants for this area, because we're not trying to grow anything too big. We've got all our fruit tree varieties are dwarf varieties. They're not going to grow too tall. It's like 15 feet, I think, to 20 feet. Yeah. Here's some more Nanking cherry. Actually, I forgot what this one is. I'm not sure. We got a big shipment of plants. I'm kind of excited to see what that is. It's another one of our berries. I suspect it might actually be another honeyberry over here, but I'm not positive. And why don't we pop over and look at some more herbaceous ones over here. So here's that goji berry that I was talking about. So this is another lycium. It takes, when I planted this in my garden, it took about 3 years to really get established until it started taking over. Goji berries are, of course, well known as one of the superfoods with incredible nutrients in it. And once they really get their feet in there, they're a spreader. So they kind of a spready shrub. They do really, really well at producing fruits. And then, oh, here's an important one. I wonder what the best way to see it is. Actually, I'll show you another Siberian pea over here in just a second that's a little bit easier to see. So Siberian pea, should I just move over here so you can see it? So this one is pretty exciting. Lillian Jacobo, they have these growing out at Kakitsmavi, where they live, the Hopi-Tutskwa permaculture location. I ordered 8 years ago what I thought was a Siberian pea shrub, and it ended up being one of the dwarf ones. And so it never grew like taller than this. And I kept waiting for this like famous high elevation permaculture plant that's another chop and drop to see what was gonna happen. So we got the correct ones after I learned I had the wrong kind to begin with. So these are gonna turn into a beautiful, nitrogen fixing shrub, and it's a prolific producer of its leaves, and it's a nitrogen fixing. So you actually cut off those branches, they drop down, and you can lay them around to help to build the soil up. And it's really great to think about your companions. Like we have another fruit tree over here. We've got an apple that's struggling. There's one nursing nursery I'm going to tell you not to order from, that we got some plants from that were not in great health. But theoretically, in Flagstaff, if you can actually plant a Siberian pea between 2 fruit trees, or if you plant another nitrogen fixing plant, at my house I have the native silverleaf buffalo berry. Oh my gosh, it's like the pear that is growing next to it is on steroids. I also have some sea berry growing at my house, which has really helped some of the fruit trees get the nutrients that they need. We have a native ceanothus that grows really well. And over in the other area with the cinders, we actually have a mountain mahogany, which is one of our native nitrogen fixing plants. So you can take any of the native nitrogen fixing plants that are already really low water need, and you can plant those, or you can also think about a Siberian pea, which is pretty well adapted to this area and doesn't take a ton of water either. So yeah, let's see what else we have. We can't forget elderberry because it's amazing. We have 3 elderberries in this garden. So that one is tucked over here. So elderberries are just lovely. I have a huge one at my house now that's 8 years old, and it's much taller than me. I think it's probably 7 or 8 feet by now, and it just keeps giving fruit again and again and again. So you can use the blossoms for creating lovely wine if you want to, or you can make just a water like refreshments really good. But we tend to save all the berries for a family, and then every year I make a batch of elderberry syrup. With honey and sometimes with clove and with ginger. And then through the cold season, my family takes that regularly to help to ward off colds. So I think there's pretty good research now that shows that elderberry helps to boost your white blood cells. And so they recommend before travel that you take it for like 3 days. You take it for 3 days after, and it'll prevent you from getting sick, and it also shortens the duration of a flu or any illness or cold that you get. So pretty cool that in Flagstaff we can do that ourselves, and we can grow them, and they grow so beautifully and so well, and they're a native, so they're really well adapted and grow great. We've got some other kind of random fun plants in here. There's a little skullcap we just got. This one is a common roux, which I read was used during the plague to ward off disease, which is interesting when we think about some of our artemisias are traditionally used like a smudge and for purification, and can actually kill bacteria in the air. And I wonder if this plant might have some of those qualities as well. I don't know enough about it to know, but they would actually tie it around their neck and carry it around with them. So I thought that was kind of interesting given our COVID times. And yeah, I think the last section to check out is just right over here. We have a couple exciting plants growing. We had planted a hazelnut last year at the end of the season from this free seedling we got that was not in the best shape, and we didn't think it was going to survive, and it came back. So at some point, we're actually going to have to give this hazelnut some more space from the plum tree, because even though we're looking to keep them kind of smaller and pruned, that's way too close to have two trees growing. So hazelnuts, again, that's a permaculture plant that I've heard can grow up at high elevation, but I haven't heard of anyone growing it successfully in the Flagstaff area at all. So we're not sure if it's even going to produce, but we're going to give it a try. Plums are a sure bet. Those do excellent in Flagstaff. This is a 3-way grafted plum. The note I wanted to give was a recommendation to not buy from Burgess Seed and Company. They have a beautiful catalog, but if you actually get on there and check out Better Business Bureau or any of their reviews, I have never seen more scathing reviews of a company. Of the plants, that seedlings that we got from them, about 1/4 of them were dead and or died. So we paid $40 for 5-way grafted plum and apple, and we got 3-way grafted plants. That this one is, you know, it looks like maybe it's going to survive. We need to snip it below the graft there, but our apple died and our pear died and our hops died, and there were many things that came, or they shipped us dead elderberries. So stay away from that company. It's owned by 6 different huge conglomerates, and they're not taking good care of their plants. So even though it's tempting because they have a lot of the harder to find ones, finding some other companies, I know I've ordered from One World out of Oregon, I think it is, or Green World, and they're really wonderful and take good care of their plants and love them. So over here, this is a little bit of a shadier section of our garden that maintains a little bit more moisture. So we actually put in a strawberry patch So we've got a couple different varieties of strawberries in there. I don't even remember what they are anymore. One of them's the Alpine, the creepy crawly, smaller, more native high elevation one. And then we've got some more of the ever-bearing types of strawberries. And then our new most exciting things. So a quick plug for, I think it's Blue Moon with Judy Springer, who is a local grower in Flagstaff. She's got a nursery. She grows some of the most amazing medicinal plants that grow well at high elevation. And one of her great successes is over here is Osha. So as long as I've been here and been passionate about Osha, which is about 20 years since I came to Flagstaff, I have not known anyone that has successfully propagated it and had it grow. So here it is, testament that she was able to propagate and grow, and they're growing in her backyard. We've got 3 of them. Osha is a super important medicinal plant that has been over-harvested in our forest from folks that don't know what they're doing and aren't following the same traditions and respect of longtime herbalists that always listen to the plants and don't over-harvest. But Osha, the roots of that plant are really, really good medicine for sore throat, immune boosting, cough. So we are experimenting with Osha, and then we're also experimenting over here. We've got some little arnica seedlings from her. So arnica, I've seen them growing in the wild closer to 12,000 feet up in the Colorado mountains. But she said that they can grow successfully here. So we are trying them out to add to our medicine cabinet in this garden, more or less. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. We've got some more gooseberries and currants, another mulberry over here, and then we've got the beautiful native Arizona grape growing behind us as well. So yeah, is there anything else should cover? We're good? All right, I think that's it. So good luck with your growing at high elevation wherever you are. Take care.